Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your Saturday morning, this dreary, drizzly, typical Seattle day, to spend some time with us talking about food and mood. I'm going to do some introductions. My name is Christy Hofsess, and I'm a licensed psychologist and faculty member at Bastyr University. And I am pleased to introduce my co-presenters. Amy Frasieur is a registered dietitian and also a core faculty member in the Department of Nutrition. And we are very honored to be working with our two advanced graduate students, Zoe Fisher-Falk and Jessica Stevens, who worked with us on the development of this presentation and are going to be presenting with us today. All of us represent a unique and innovative master's program that Bastyr offers. It's a Master's of Science in Nutrition and Clinical Health Psychology. So we teach in that program, and our students are actually earning their dual degrees from this program. So it's from this knowledge base that we bring with you some of the current science of nutrition and of clinical health psychology to talk about this reciprocal relationship between food and mood. So let's start with a love story, though. I mean, to just kind of start our morning off, right? Is anyone interested in hearing a love story? Who isn't? Okay, so he was only a chocolate chip cookie, but I loved him. I met him at a party. There he was at the end of the buffet, a loner, the last one on the plate. He had a certain something, a sweetness, a sensuality. He was one hot cookie. I felt as if I'd always known him, always hungered for him. When he looked at me with those warm brown eyes, I melted. Before I knew it, I had my hands on him, my mouth on him in public. After that night, we were inseparable. With him, I could be myself. He didn't seem to care what mood I was in, how I looked, if I gained weight. Together, we had the recipe for happiness. No one satisfied me like Chip. But then things changed. My friend said he was no good for me. He started to give me heartburn. I felt crummy. It had to end. Now we've gone our separate ways. I hardly think of him anymore. Oh, if I see a certain TV commercial, a particular magazine ad, or a coupon for 10% off, that old longing returns, and we run into each other at the supermarket. We nod. We're friendly, but it's over. So how many of you can relate to that story, maybe even a morsel of it, no pun intended? Okay. So what we're going to be doing today is talking about the relationship between food and mood. And I'm going to start with a framework that can underlie the connection between food and mood. And then we're going to specifically talk about how mood affects food, how mood affects our food choices and our eating patterns, stress eating and emotional eating, and the role that mindfulness plays in helping us actually manage maybe those patterns. And then we're going to spend time talking about how food affects mood. And Jessica and Amy are going to talk about amino acid balance and brain function, micronutrient deficiencies, macronutrient excesses and deficiencies, and external stimulants. So this is how we're going to spend our time for the day. We do ask that you kind of save your questions for the end. We'll have plenty of time to answer your questions and look forward to them at the end of our talk. So I'm going to start with kind of two concepts that are really important to understanding the connection between food and mood. And the first one is the mind-body connection. How many of you have heard of the mind-body connection? Okay, most of you. The science of mind-body medicine looks at the relationship between our mental health and our physical health, right? And the role that psychological factors play in our health and disease and ill health. A very concrete example of that is the impact that our thoughts have on our physiology. Are you interested and willing to do a little exercise with me? Sure. Okay, great, thank you. For those of you who are ready, what I invite you to do is just kind of, if you're holding anything, put it down. Just kind of get comfortable in your chairs. And if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes. Take a deep breath. and another one, and another one. And I want you to imagine right now that you're sitting in your kitchen, and at your kitchen table are 2 ripe lemons. And there's a knife next to one of them, and you cut the first lemon in half, and then you cut the second lemon in half. You take half of a lemon and you hold it in your hand, and maybe you squeeze it a little bit, and you can imagine kind of the juices flowing between your fingers, starting to feel sticky. And imagine like you're bringing it up to your nose, and you're smelling the wafts of the lemon. And now bring it to your mouth. Imagine as if you were going to take a bite into that lemon. Notice what's happening in your mouth. I notice as I do that, I'm starting to pucker. The salivary enzymes are secreting, and I can anticipate the tartness of a lemon. Is that happening to anyone else right now? Yeah, so some of you. Okay, great. Well, none of us are eating lemons, but our bodies were responding as if we were. And that's a simple demonstration of the mind-body connection. Let's talk about another connection in our bodies that might be a little lesser known. How many of you have heard of the brain-gut connection, or the brain in our belly, the brain in our guts? Okay, some of you, great. So there's a term for that called the enteric nervous system, and that is this separate yet interconnected brain in our digestive tract. This system, this brain in our gut, has over 100 million neurons, some of the same hormones and chemicals that the brains in our head. Okay, this enteric nervous system, the brain in our belly, is largely responsible for the activities of digestion and among others. And it's actually an autonomously functioning brain. Like the brain in our heads kind of delegates the work of digestion to this brain in our bellies. And did you know that over 95% of the neurotransmitter serotonin, which is a mood-altering neurotransmitter, is actually released from our gut? There's implications that this brain in our belly does even more than just regulate digestion. So thinking about maybe butterflies in your stomach. Anyone ever have butterflies in your stomach, right? Maybe the nerves in there are responding to physiological stress. Okay? I'm going to just read a quote by a professor of physiology, psychiatry, and biobehavioral sciences at the UCLA School of Medicine. And he says, "Our system is way too complicated, this enteric nervous system, to have evolved only to make sure things move out of your colon. For example, scientists were shocked to learn that about 90% of the fibers in the primary visceral nerve, the vagus, carry information from the gut to the brain, and not the other way around." Okay. So there is a reciprocal relationship between the brains in our belly and the brain between our ears. And that is the foundation of many of the things we're going to be talking about today. Specifically, these two questions: how does mood affect food and our food choices, and how does food affect mood? All right, so I'm going to talk about a very common phenomenon, stress. How many of you have felt stressed in the last month? Okay, in the last week? Maybe in the last 24 hours? How many of you have eaten when you've been stressed? Okay, maybe you're working through lunch, right? You've got a project that's due, a deadline, you just got an email from your boss, can you get this to me by 3? There goes your lunch hour. You're working on your proposal, and you're shoveling in whatever it is you brought for the day, right? Or you're driving to work and you're rushing because you're a little late, and you bring your breakfast, a muffin, and you're eating that while you're driving, and then someone cuts you off, or you're in traffic. It's common to feel and experience stress today, and it's even common to eat while we're stressed. But let's take a closer look at the relationship between stress and eating. I'm going to highlight a little bit of stress and metabolism. So The gastrointestinal function, part of our digestive tract of this ENS system, serves to regulate the activities of digestion, right? Gets our stomach churning, gets our enzymes ready for digestion, helps nutrient absorption into the bloodstream. Okay, this is when our digestive system is in full force and fully functioning, right? That happens when we've eaten a meal and there's food to digest. Right? And our digestion system kind of turns off when there's no food to digest. But our digestive system actually also turns off and is triggered by another factor. And that is when our fight or flight response is on. What triggers our fight or flight response? Stress. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that actually when we're stressed, our digestion is not working properly. Right? If you think of it like a switch, our stress response is on, our digestion is off. Okay. Why is that? Well, kind of our bodies are preparing to, manage whatever that stress is, right? It's more important to get that, save ourselves from the saber-toothed tiger, or get the report into our boss, or be a safe driver. We can save digestion for later. When our stress response is off and we're relaxed, we're home, so our body says, oh, now we can eat, now we can digest, now I can digest my food, right? So this actually has implications for more than just eating healthy foods, right? This data suggests that it's actually being in an ideal state to absorb foods that is the other half of the story, okay? Let's look even a little more closely at the biochemical impact of stress. I'm not going to read this entire slide, but I'll highlight a few things. So stress decreases nutrient absorptions. We're not absorbing as many nutrients. Decreases thermic efficiency, which is the body's ability to burn calories. Decreases gastric emptying, that can lead to diarrhea. Decreases muscle mass, so we'll have a little more flab and slower metabolism. Stress increases nutrient deficiencies, salt retention, cortisol. Many clinical studies show the connection between high cortisol and fat accumulation in the abdomen and obesity. Okay? Increases in swallowing rate, that can lead to digestive upset. We see others, risk of osteoporosis, inflammation, for example. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that if we, use food to manage our stress, and those of you who might be stress eaters, or even those of you who might not even be aware that, gosh, when you're eating and you're stressed, there's some things happening in your body, that there's some consequences of eating under stress. So if we know that our digestive force is not in full function, right? We may lose the ability to detect our hunger and satiety cues. We don't necessarily maybe know when we're full or when we're still hungry. This also happens because we might be paying attention to other things, right? Our proposal, driving, the television, the Seahawks game this afternoon, right? I mean, when you're doing something else and you're not paying attention to your body's cues, and that can lead to over or under eating. The excess cortisol desensitizes us to pleasure, so we tend to eat more. Both of these two factors can lead to weight gain. We see an increase in cravings. How many of you experience cravings? We could probably go around and share common craving foods. I crave Cheetos. Some other people crave cream puffs. But let's talk about cravings, because it actually demonstrates something about the body's brilliance. So when you crave a cream puff and you eat it, right? What's happening is that excess cortisol is ushering those extra calories into fat, depositing fat in your abdomen. And those fat deposits actually then send a signal to your brain that says, turn off the fight or flight response. That's why in the moment you actually feel, oh, that was good, feel a little relaxed, right? Because it's turning off that fight or flight response. you know, I won't state the obvious about the long-term consequences of turning to cream puffs or Cheetos every time you need to turn off that stress response. Okay? We see that nutrient excesses and deficiencies. This is that tendency to reach for convenient foods, right? We're eating foods that, you know, where we have more nutrients that we don't need and less of those that we need, right? We also see digestive distress, gas, bloating. This is because there's 4 times less blood flow happening in our digestive system. And chronic stress, chronic conditions can lead to conditions like irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, so these are some of the consequences of eating under stress. And remember that thinking stressful thoughts actually has the same impact as eating under stress. So you don't have to be at work working on your proposal. You could be at home thinking about being at work and working on your proposal. You could be at home thinking about the traffic that you're going to face, or, right? That actually just thinking about those stressors has the same impact. Remember the lemons, right? You don't have to have a real lemon to have our body respond as if we do. Okay. So I want to take just a minute or two and have you talk to a neighbor about some of these questions. What do you notice about how stress affects your own eating patterns? Do you tend to eat more or less when you're feeling anxious or stressed? How often do you eat under stress? What foods do you tend to eat when you're stressed? Do you feel hungry or full? So just take a minute or two and introduce yourself to your neighbor and share a little bit about your reactions to these questions.
It's ours, but I wouldn't like that. Bring your attention back to the group. So we obviously don't have as much time today to really talk more about, these patterns, but we encourage you to kind of continue this conversation beyond today. And actually, I'm going to talk about 3 tips for managing stress eating, and the first one is self-monitoring. And that is where you kind of track your mood, your food choices, and the impact. In your packets, I want to highlight, actually there's a food and mood journal that you could use on the second page of your packet. And this is to help become more aware of the patterns that you are engaging in when you're stressed or based on any particular mood.
Self-monitoring actually also helps. If you know, hey, I already know what my patterns are, I know I stress eat, and I know when, I know what foods, self-monitoring actually can help you start to make a change. So even for those of you that say, hey, I want to do something different, we still recommend self-monitoring. It helps increase awareness, and that's one of the first steps to behavior change. So the second tip for stress eating is to develop a long-term stress management plan. So if you discover that you're feeling more stress in your life than you would want, really putting in place a long-term stress management plan. For example, identifying the sources of your stressors and developing a plan for addressing them. So if finances are a concern, develop a budget, stick to it. If there are relationship issues, find out what's at the heart of that, and get some support, improve communication skills. Whatever the source of your stressor is, develop a plan to move toward that. And also build in other techniques to turn off that stress response, right? To shift your body's physiology. Exercise, there's an array of mind-body techniques out there. You want to find those that work for you. Yoga, relaxation, meditation, imagery. There's a whole host of activities. You find one that works for you, but you really build that in. Okay, long-term stress management plan. And then finally, in the short term, this is a short-term tip, you could actually do it today when you leave and you have your next meal. Slow down when you eat. Rushing actually increases your cortisol, your stress hormones, and we know now what that does to our digestion. Okay, take an extra 5 minutes to eat your meal. Right, turn off the computer. Take a deep breath. Your breath is the most portable tool to help turn off that fight or flight response. And Zoe will talk a little bit about kind of giving you some tips for how to do that in the moment and carry that with you. But you want to think about how to turn off the fight or flight response so you can turn on digestion, so you can be in a state where you're able to really fully absorb and digest the foods that you're eating. And a lot of what we are talking about is about increasing your awareness in these patterns, and that helps with both stress eating and emotional eating, and Zoe's going to cover that.
Hi everybody, I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to start by talking about emotional eating, and I wonder if you guys would be willing to participate and kind of help me answer this question. What is emotional eating?
Sure.
Yeah? Yeah, please, share.
Oh, you want me to share? Right
If you don't mind, that would be lovely.
Open my mouth and get my foot in there. Okay. What is emotional eating? Well, I remember every time I would visit my mom and dad's house, I'd park in the back and go through the kitchen. And before I'd even see mom and dad, or I'd not call out, I'd go right to the fridge. So I thought that was rather telling.
Yeah, so just being in the parents' home,
right,
was a connection to eating and the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anybody? Yeah.
Driving to the parents' home and stopping somewhere and getting something because you know it's going to be a adversarial
Okay.
time.
So maybe some anxiety, maybe kind of some of the stress that Christy was talking about, a little bit more negative emotions, it sounds like, in that scenario with food. Anybody else? Yeah.
It just has a distraction mechanism. I've got something so similar to what everyone's saying, but I may have a large project that I need to do at work. Before I'll jump into it, I build up the anxiety around it, and I'll think, maybe I'll have a meal instead. Or maybe I'm hungry instead, right? So I just distract myself with food.
Right. Yeah.
Another one is that when I'm happy, I celebrate with food. When I'm depressed, I try and lift myself with food.
Okay, so both positive, more positive and negative emotions, happy and sad emotions can both be coupled with eating. Anything else? one thing that was not really mentioned but has come up in conversations in the past is some foods have really potent emotional meanings and connotations that are connected to them. So some of our comfort foods, some foods maybe that you ate in childhood, that, you know, it could be a positive or negative emotion that's related, but food and emotions are just, they're just really combined together in ways that are really difficult to pick them apart. And I don't know that it's always bad. I don't know that it's always a problem. And so I wonder, how do you know if it is a problem? Anybody?
When you can't stop.
When you can't stop. So, and what I would say is, if there's an ongoing pattern that's causing you distress, maybe there's something problematic happening. Anything else? So, when food and emotional eating and this kind of enmeshment is a problem, it's often a coping mechanism that is fulfilling a need that we're having, like an emotional need, that's not physical hunger. And figuring out what is it that I need, that I'm trying to sort out with food, is really an important step in being able to make any change with that. And so I have this cycle of emotional eating, which may not be relevant to everybody, but is a pretty common phenomenon, where there's something uncomfortable, like an emotion, that comes up. And we might deal with it by having some food to distract ourselves, to soothe ourselves if we're feeling uncomfortable. And then it works. I mean, it does. It works. It just doesn't work for very long, necessarily, right? And then for some of us, there's some really negative feelings that result. Has anybody experienced this? And then, not everybody, but it does happen where those negative feelings that result actually mean that you might eat again to deal with those uncomfortable feelings. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced that, but this cycle can continue, or maybe for some people it stops and then it happens again the next time that feeling comes up. And so if we want to break this cycle, where might we make a change? Anybody? Yeah.
With our emotions.
With our emotions. And what would that look like?
Neutralizing them.
So doing something to deal with this emotional response. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
In the awareness part, where you sense the emotion coming and then you can say, oh, here it is, you know, maybe I should not go into the freezer right now.
So somewhere in here is what I think you're saying is, so seeing that the emotion is happening and I'm drawn toward this eating behavior and having enough awareness to maybe make a different choice? Yeah?
You substitute the food for something else. But if I go to the house and I've got my exercise equipment here and I got the refrigerator here, I'm going to the refrigerator every time.
So having a different activity is great, and figuring out how to actually make that change is a little more difficult than just talking about it.
Here.
Yeah.
I think you need to work out ahead of time what types of things you could do instead of food.
Planning.
And start trying to practice that.
Okay.
It takes, I think they say it takes about 30 days to learn a new habit. So
right.
I figure times it by 10, that's about probably how many days it takes.
So planning ahead of time so that when that comes up, you know what to do. And it sounds like you're also saying having some patience, that it's going to take some time to change this behavior.
And a good acupuncture session helps too.
And maybe some support is really helpful. Yeah. And so I just want to propose an additional place in this cycle. So if this cycle does go from feeling badly about the food choices you've made back into dealing with those feelings, maybe guilt or shame or many others that we might be feeling, if that is happening, there's an opportunity to insert a different response when those feelings come up. And I would say having some forgiveness, some empathy for yourself and some love for yourself, and believing that you can make a different choice would be a more adaptive response than going with shame and guilt and kind of those more negative emotions that will kind of keep us in a cycle of behavior. What do you guys think about that? Yeah? Is that a hand back there?
Oh, I was just saying it's like going into the emotion. We've been taught so very often just to avoid and don't pay attention because no matter they were considered important. You know,
right.
Everything was all logos and brain and rational.
Right. And so tuning into that emotion to figure out what you actually need is kind of what I'm hearing you say. So the question here is what emotions are triggering eating for you? To develop this awareness, really figuring out what is that emotion. And so this is a tool that's in your packet. If you flip through it, you'll find it. It's called a hunger scale. And it's a tool that I've found very effective if you're having trouble differentiating between physical and emotional hunger, which is kind of a basic step in being able to recognize what's going on in this cycle. And so there's some questions that I'd ask you to reflect on. What hunger levels are you familiar with? Oh, and let me orient you to this actually before you do that. So 0 is when you're completely empty, no food. And 10 is like Thanksgiving Day, you ate as much as you possibly can, and you're on the couch, and your pants are undone, and you have to go to sleep. Okay?
There's a smile on your face.
And most people have experienced these extremes at some point in their lives, and usually they're really memorable. And so 5 is neutral, and I just wonder if everybody is familiar with all of these levels. I certainly wasn't when I first looked at this scale. And it can be tricky and very individual to figure out what it's like to be at each of these places for each individual, because everybody has different kind of symptoms and things that tell them how hungry or full they are. So what happens if you get to a 1 or a 2? Anybody want to share?
I get hangry.
You get hangry. Probably start feeling some stress that Christy was talking about. We start feeling kind of insecure, like body doesn't know when we're going to get food next. And the other questions up here, what level are you at when you finish your meal is something great to reflect on. And what level would you feel most comfortable at the end of your meal? Are they the same? Are they different? Something that you can try is recording your hunger before your meal. So taking a moment, tuning in, how hungry am I before I begin to eat? And then reflecting midway through your meal, how hungry am I midway through? And then when you're done, again, going back to the hunger scale and how full am I, hungry or full? Where am I on the scale at the end of the meal? It's a nice way to kind of slow down and have some self-awareness while you're eating. And so I have some strategies here for addressing emotional eating, not too unlike those strategies for stress eating, because they're kind of combined. I think we're seeing that. And we've talked about this. One of the big things is recognizing what is the need, what is the emotion, what do I actually want that I'm utilizing food to fulfill. And so there's that food mood journal that Christy pointed out in your packet. And kind of tracking your patterns, you can just look at mood if you don't want to look at food and see if that helps. All of that is going to bring more awareness to what's going on. And then learning to recognize true hunger from emotional hunger. I would say physical hunger from emotional hunger. You can use the hunger scale for that. And then, as we were saying, learning to identify the emotions and then figuring out how to express those emotions, which is, I think, kind of the more complex part for some folks. So there is a list, an additional list in your packet that it says something like alternative activities to emotional eating. And there's a big long list of things, and I'd encourage you to play around with that and look for comfort and soothing and coping in other places other than food, in places other than food. Doing things like having some tea, calling a friend and talking about what's going on, self-care in general is great, maybe some exercise, maybe even some distraction. Because sometimes that's what we're looking for in food, is a distraction and a way to procrastinate. So doing that in a different way. And if you're really struggling, seeking some professional help from a nutritionist or a therapist or another provider can be really helpful. And so now we're going to transition and talk a little bit about mindfulness, which is really relevant to what we're talking about with becoming more aware with emotional eating. And so, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is paying attention on purpose in a particular way. Another way of saying that is that it's being attentive to the present moment without judgment. Attention to that moment-to-moment experience with an intention and attitude of all of these things: acceptance, non-judging, openness, trust, patience, letting go, gentleness, non-striving, and kindness. And so I'm going to read you guys a poem that kind of embodies the spirit of mindfulness. It's called The Guest House by Rumi. Has anybody ever heard this poem? Yeah. Okay. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be cleaning you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each guest has been sent as a guide from the beyond. So if we take mindfulness and we combine it with eating, we get mindful eating, which is eating. So the definition is eating mindfully means eating with awareness of the food you have on your plate and the experience of eating each bite. It includes your eating environment. It is being present moment by moment with each sensation that happens during eating, such as chewing, tasting, and swallowing, as well as noting the temperature, texture, and seasoning. Means not being distracted while we're eating. That's kind of a tall order, but it's something to strive for. Anybody familiar with this concept? Yeah. So there's lots of benefits to being present to your eating experience and to really being tuned in to what's happening with your food. So some of the benefits, and these kind of, if we go think back to what Christy was talking about with kind of the problems that come up with stress eating, these are a way to really counterbalance those things. So benefits to mindful eating include effective weight management, enhanced energy and mood, enhanced self-efficacy around food choice. So if I'm tuned in and I'm paying attention to what's going on, how full I am, what I really want to eat, what do I really want to eat that's going to really fulfill my craving or my hunger or whatever it may be, it gives us a lot more control over our food choices so that we're not making impulsive decisions around food. And it increases our body awareness and our emotional literacy to have that mindfulness as we're moving through the world and making food choices. And it increases pleasure and enjoyment of food. And in the same kind of vein of thought, the cephalic response is a really interesting thing to consider. I'm going to read this really jargony paragraph / sentence, and then we'll talk about it. So, autonomic and endocrine reflexes involved in the metabolism of food that are triggered by sensory contact with foodstuffs rather than by post-ingestional consequences of food. Which, in more accessible words, means paying attention to how our food looks, feels, smells, sounds, and tastes affects not only our enjoyment of our meal, but also how we digest it and how it nourishes our body. So, something related to this that really strikes home for me is when we're aware that we are eating and paying attention to our food, we tend to get more pleasure and feel more satisfaction from it. And when we eat mindlessly and we're throwing food into our mouth while we're doing something else, we may just continue to remain hungry because we haven't actually had the sensory experience of consuming our meal. So although our body may be fed, we weren't tuned into the process of actually having that meal. You guys have any questions about this? Oh, we're supposed to do questions later. Sorry. So, just to close this mindful eating section, I would like to invite you guys to practice a little bit of deep breathing and look at this acronym, Be Calm, with me. The idea would be that you might utilize this if you are feeling stressed, but you can also utilize it before you sit down to eat to get your body in that place that Christy was talking about where digestion is on and we're relaxed and we're really set up to fully absorb our nutrients and enjoy our meal. And so, starting with Be Calm, belly is soft, breath fills the diaphragm, easy, regular, and slow breath. Chest is open, shoulders are relaxed, arms are loose and rest in your lap, legs are loose and firmly planted on the floor, mouth and jaw are relaxed, lips slightly parted. And I'd like to invite you guys to do some deep breathing. Place your right hand on your chest, your left hand on your belly, get comfy in your chair, and just breathe in deeply and notice which hand comes up higher than the other hand, which hand is rising, and try to get that hand on your belly to move more than the hand on your chest as you breathe in deeply, feeling your lungs from the bottom to the top, trying to fill your lung completely with air from the bottom, filling all the way to the top, and pushing out all of the stale air in your lungs completely. And as Christy mentioned, beginning with the breath, you can really create relaxation in your body and get yourself in a place where you're really ready to sit down and presently enjoy and digest your meal. And that's going to conclude our Impact of Mood on Food section. And I believe Amy is going to take over and start talking about how food impacts mood.
All right, so we're switching gears a little bit, and we just spent a lot of time talking about how food is impacted by your mood. And now we're going to talk about how your mood is impacted by food. And I think in switching gears, that doesn't mean that we leave everything we just talked about behind, right? We're still thinking about all of those components. But we do want to give some examples of how also then your food choices impact your mood, because they both play a role. So what we're going to cover between Jessica and I, we're going to talk a little bit about amino acids and brain function. I'm going to talk about micronutrient deficiencies, and then Jessica's going to jump in and talk about macronutrients, components of those, and some external stimulus, how those might play a role in our mood as well. So if we talk about the physiology of emotions, Dr. Hofsess started out giving you some concepts around this brain-gut connection and some of the things that are happening in our bodies. One of the kind of scientific jargons I want you to be aware of is something called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that are responsible for moving the neurons, the signals in our brain. So you may have heard about neurotransmitters, you may have heard of synapses, right? All those things that are happening in our brain, they also happen in our gut. Neurotransmitters are responsible for those. And if we think about those broken down, I'm going to give you some examples. We know that neurotransmitters are responsible for regulating some of our behavior. Behavior in terms of mood, so how we feel, but also behavior in terms of motor function. Neurotransmitters also do things like move synapses so that our muscles contract and relax, that our heart beats, that our blood pressure raises and lowers as needed. They're responsible for all of those components. They're also really closely, though, linked to mood, and I'm going to give you some examples of those. And they're influenced by what we eat. So to make sure that our neurotransmitters are effectively working, we need to give them nourishment, just like we do all the other cells in our body. Before I flip this slide, also one thing I do want to state is that although neurotransmitters are impacted by food, there are other things that impact them as well, which we aren't talking about today. But genetic predisposition plays a role. So if perhaps you are predisposed to having higher or lower amounts of these chemicals in your body, that could be the case. Also, stress plays a role in having higher or lower amounts of neurotransmitters. Medications, drugs can be examples of how those are influenced as well. And some of those external stimulants we'll talk about in a little bit. So specific to food and neurotransmitters, there are several, but some of the three that we'll talk about today, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine, are most closely linked to mood. So if we think about this, the production of these chemicals relies on components in our diet. Also, if we have those either deficiencies or excesses, too little or too much, some of that can be because of the foods that we consume. So in talking about those, dopamine, for example, is perhaps impacts mood because we know that if some people have lower amounts of dopamine, they may be more apt to have depression. If we think about lower amounts of dopamine, some individuals have more social anxiety around lower amounts of dopamine. Also, Parkinson's syndrome is related to lower amounts of dopamine in our body. So again, Parkinson's more related to our physiological function, social anxiety more around mood. Right? No, this is a little bit small and hard to read, but you'll see that right here it says nutrient, protein, gives some food sources, and then talks about both dopamine and norepinephrine. So that's an example, which I'll give you some specifics, that protein is significantly responsible for providing what's needed to create the neurotransmitter dopamine. So if we were to have perhaps too little protein in our diet, we may have lower amounts, which could be contributed to anxiety. Norepinephrine, one of the interesting things about norepinephrine is that it's also related to, it can be related to anxiety. Norepinephrine particularly is kind of part of that fight or flight response that Dr. Hofsess was talking about. So when we look at neurotransmitters, some of them are considered inhibitory. They decrease those transmissions. Some are excitatory. Norepinephrine is excitatory. It means that it's a response that makes us have that fight or flight, that chemical reaction. So the optimal amount of norepinephrine can help us have a really nice calm demeanor, sort of that mood of just being calm and feeling comfortable. But perhaps if we have excess norepinephrine, it can fuel our kind of fight or flight response. So again, related to perhaps anxiety or tension or increased stress. And then serotonin. Serotonin is the primary neurotransmitter that we talk about, which is that produces that sense of well-being, that feeling of calmness and well-being. Serotonin is also responsible significantly for our sleep. Being able to sleep comfortably and well means that you have an optimal amount of serotonin. So when we think about if we had perhaps not enough serotonin, we might have trouble sleeping, we might have more anxiety, we might have depression, more depression. When we look at how food responds or creates these mood-altering changes, we look at building blocks. So one primary food component for each of these neurotransmitters is protein. It's probably the primary component. So protein is considered a building block for our cells. And we think about that related, you may have been told that protein is helpful for building muscle, perhaps. Protein does the same thing basically for our neurotransmitters. It's helpful in creating these optimal levels of chemicals in our brain and in our gut. So for example, serotonin is primarily derived from an amino acid. Amino acids are the components that make up proteins. Tryptophan. Have any of you heard of tryptophan before? Where have you heard about, or is there a food source or something that... Turkey. Talk about it at Thanksgiving, eating that turkey, and then you want to fall asleep. So notice I said that serotonin plays a strong role in sleep habits, and so having lots of tryptophan, building up some serotonin, that's kind of where that example of turkey and then you want to sleep a little bit comes into play. So sources of tryptophan, a type of amino acid or protein, you can think of would be things like meat products, especially things like meat, turkey, chicken, eggs, but also things like fish. It's in fish and some seafood. You'll notice it in some plant products as well, things like soybeans, bananas, nuts, oats, wheat germ. So if you're familiar with whole grains versus refined grains, a whole grain has a bran and a germ and an endosperm. It's 3 components to make a whole grain. When we refine them, we get rid of the germ and the bran. We're only left with the endosperm. And what we find is that the germ and the bran that we got rid of are really the parts that have the most nutrients. So that's why we talk about eating whole grains. Avocados, milk, cheese, cottage cheese, beans. So whether you're someone who is a carnivore and you eat meat, chicken, turkey, all those things, or if you're someone who perhaps is a vegetarian or a vegan, you can find sources of tryptophan in many different types of foods to promote serotonin levels. Dopamine and norepinephrine specifically have different types of amino acids that are responsible for those. So phenylalanine and tyrosine. Yet you'll see that they have some similar sources as far as foods go. So avocados, bananas, lima beans are good examples. Things like dairy, meat, fish, eggs. So in a little bit we'll have you think about kind of your diet and your dietary choices and perhaps where you're getting sources of these different amino acids in your diet. And again, it's sort of like, I think of Goldilocks, right? There was the too small chair and the too big chair and the just right chair, or the bowl of porridge that was too cold or too hot or just right. Think about that in relation to our food choices as well. We don't need too much, but we also don't want too little. We sort of want the amount that is just right for us to keep us at an optimal level. So beyond protein, some other food sources that are really important for neurotransmitters and our mood are what we call micronutrients. These are the vitamins and minerals that are in our food. Specifically, I've provided some examples up here that are considered kind of most important for neurotransmitters. One at the top here are fatty acids. What kinds of fatty acids might you have heard of? Anything? Does that term ring a bell? Do any of you take, sometimes people take supplements for this. What might be an example, can you think? Fish oil, I heard somebody say. So Jessica will talk a little bit more, but if you've heard of omega-3 fatty acids, they're considered the most supportive for mood and brain function. So we see those in sources of really fatty fish, things like salmon, cold water fish also. But you can find them in foods like walnuts, flaxseed, right? Also have sources of omega-3 fatty acids. One other place that's been talked about a little bit lately is meats. If you're a meat eater, meats that are naturally more like grass-fed, so things like grass-fed beef, actually have more omega-3 fatty acids because of their diet, because of the grasses that they're consuming, than the animal product itself that you consume has omega-3s in it. Lots of B vitamins that we'll talk about. Vitamin B3 or niacin and vitamin B6, both found in things like tuna fish and chicken and poultry, helpful for those B vitamins that we need. And folate. Anyone in here familiar with folate? I'm thinking perhaps some women might be, and I'm wondering if you know why. You need it during pregnancy. Yeah, do you know why you need it during pregnancy? It's really important for women in pregnancy. Yeah. It does. It prevents neural tube defects in infants while they're in gestation. And so if you think about neural tube defects, kind of sources of are when we're talking about neurotransmitters, a component of that. So why folate is helping also to provide optimal levels of those chemicals. So folate found a lot more when we're talking about vegetables primarily, so like leafy green vegetables are great sources of folate. And if you don't love leafy green vegetables, you can also find them in legumes, things like lentils. Some people aren't big leafy green eaters, or finding different ways to consume some of these foods that you might enjoy. People who are called super tasters sometimes have really heightened sense of taste. Greens can be very bitter, and so sometimes people who are super tasters find that they don't like those really bitter greens. Iron, copper, micronutrient minerals that we think about. Calcium. So what's the biggest source you can think of for calcium? Milk or dairy is a really common source of calcium, and it's a really excellent source of calcium. But if you choose not to have dairy or you don't have much of it, leafy greens also a really great source of calcium. If you've ever heard of nettles, like the stinging nettles that you wanted to stay away from probably, you can actually make teas with nettles, and that tea is high in calcium, which is a nice other way to get some calcium. And then magnesium and lecithin. One interesting thing, which I'll talk about in a minute, but magnesium particularly, there have been more recent research saying that individuals who have deficiencies or low amounts of magnesium are at much higher risk for depression. And so perhaps that's one component. It may not be the only thing or the only quick fix, but perhaps someone who's not getting enough magnesium, just being able to consume more magnesium in the diet could play a role in depression. So when we talk about micronutrients related to our mood, especially those B vitamins that I just talked about, some of those B3, B6, folate, right, are closely related to our mood. I remember as a teenager and a kid, my mom used to tell me to take a B vitamin supplement, that it was good for my mood, and I didn't know what she was talking about. Now also, that was the only supplement I ever took. We were sort of more of a household of food stuffs rather. But what I found out is that B vitamins especially are coefficients for those formations of those chemicals, those neurotransmitters. So you have to have optimal amounts of those B vitamins to be able to make dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine. If you're insufficient, for example, insufficient in B12, can play a role in anemia, something called megaloblastic anemia. And signs and symptoms of that are things like fatigue. So mood also, considering all the components of your mood and how that might be impacted. If I'm exceptionally fatigued because I have anemia related to a B vitamin deficiency, then the more fatigued I feel, which is related to my mood, probably also the more that it might impact other components of my mood. If I'm tired, then I might also be grumpy and frustrated, and maybe I, am more stressed or anxious because I'm not getting things done because of my fatigue. So it all sort of compiles or can build upon itself. Antioxidants. Do you know where those come from or what they are? It's kind of that word like, what's an antioxidant? We live in a beautifully lovely place, but that also has a lot of rain. And if any of you drive vehicles, you might notice that over time, vehicles exposed to kind of rain and air can rust, and they oxidize. So even just oxygen, which we need to breathe and be alive, is considered an oxidant, meaning that it breaks down our cells over time. So antioxidants are the things that play a role in preventing that. And we find them primarily in vitamin sources and also really a lot in plant sources. The really bright colored fruits and vegetables. So things like vitamin A, good for our eyesight also, but we find that in sweet potatoes and carrots and bell peppers, great sources of vitamin A. Where do we find vitamin C? Oranges. Citrus is kind of the big one that we think of for vitamin C. Can you think of anything else that has a food that has vitamin C in it? Strawberries are super high in vitamin C.
Rose hips.
What was that?
Rose hips.
Rose hips. Yep.
Cayenne pepper.
Cayenne pepper, yeah. I mean, and thinking of, and peppers in general too. So even sweet peppers, bell peppers, really high in vitamin C.
Papayas are high too.
Papayas are exceptionally high. Yeah. Yeah, so you're thinking of all kinds of good examples. What about vitamin E? It's a little bit harder one. Sunflower seeds, Avocado. Lots of the sources that have a little bit of those fats in them, right? So avocados, nuts, and seeds are usually quite high in vitamin E. And then flavonoids, those are sort of a funny one. They actually, what they do is they're like a cofactor for antioxidants. They help the antioxidants be more effective. So we find flavonoids also in lots of fruits and vegetables, brightly colored. Selenium we find in nuts and seeds also. Brazil nuts are super high in selenium if you like those. Coenzyme Q10, again, another enzyme to help these neurotransmitters be produced. So when we're looking at food sources, we've already talked about proteins that play a role. And then we spent some time talking about some micronutrients, things like calcium and iron. And then we're looking at a lot of the vitamins, the B vitamins, vitamins A, C, E. Magnesium, also another really important one. So I mentioned that magnesium might play a role in depression, a really strong role in depression. So again, sources of magnesium, things like nuts, seeds, we find it high in things like pumpkin seeds. So where are you maybe getting some of these foods in your diet? Do you like some of them? Perhaps you don't like some of the other food sources that we talked about. Where can you find them? We're going to spend some time talking about that. Antioxidants are more protective in brain cell function versus the other micronutrients that we talked about that were more primary to the building of those neurotransmitters. So it's sort of a lot of scientific pieces, but what I want you to think about is the biggest thing, and what Jessica is going to add to is how do you perhaps find that your diet is varied enough to get bits and pieces of each of those. We at Bastyr tend to come from a whole foods perspective, so we really encourage getting these nutrients from food sources, maybe more so than you would from supplements. But supplementation is another component if you find that you're really lacking in some source of food for these. So we're going to move to macronutrients, and Jessica is going to talk about how macronutrients play a role. Let me sneak out of here. You've been sitting a while. You feeling okay? Do you want to take a 30-second stretch? If you don't have room to stand, maybe stretch your legs under the table. Yeah. The brain can only conceive what the body can endure. Great. You get some of the wiggles out. Go ahead and have a seat, and we'll come right back. Maybe 10 more seconds, and we'll come back. Got a countdown in the back, I see.
An extra handout.
Oh, an extra handout? Yeah. What? No. Oh. You ready to come back? All right, let's get going again. So Amy presented on amino acid balance and how they influence neurotransmitters. We talked a little bit about micronutrients, and now I want to talk to you about macronutrients. And are we all familiar with macronutrients, that term and what it means? Is there anybody that would like me to kind of explain what macro, okay, thanks. Macronutrients, so macro meaning large. So these are the nutrients that we need a large amount of for energy production. These are the foods that have calories. So we're talking about fat, carbohydrates, and protein. So that's what we're going to talk about. And what we're going to start by talking about is carbohydrates. How many love carbohydrates? Breads, cookies, pastas, the grains. Yeah. So I want to present to you a study of carb cravers. And carb cravers through the study were defined as people with an overwhelming desire to consume carbohydrate-rich foods in an attempt to improve their mood. And so in this study, it studied women, a large group of women who fit this category of carb cravers. And for 2 weeks, every day they were presented with two choices. They could choose a protein-rich beverage or a carbohydrate-rich beverage. And before they consumed their beverage, they charted what their mood was, what their mood was at that time. And then afterwards, they recorded what their mood was. And for the carb cravers that chose carbohydrates, that their mood prior to this choice was that they were mildly dysphoric. So a little low mood, mildly depressed, you might say. Within 20 minutes of consuming their carbohydrate-rich beverage, they reported an elevated mood. They felt better, and it took 20 minutes. So this is an example of how food can influence our mood, but also how we can get in this cycle where we choose food because of our mood, and then our mood influences why we choose our food, and we can get stuck. And do you feel like sometimes your carbohydrates, like every day, that cookie in the afternoon, that's not an option? Does it feel like that for anyone? Yeah, you've been there. You've been there. It's familiar. Yeah. Cookie Monster says, today me will live in the moment unless it's unpleasant, in which case me will choose a cookie. Yeah. So macronutrients, now let's talk about deficiency. That was in excess, the carb binging. Oh, one thing I want to say about carb binging is that people where this is a chronic issue for them, they're eating 800 plus calories a day for just that binge, which is a meal or larger than a single meal in that calorie consumption. So you can see how this choice, where sometimes it is just a cookie is the only thing that's going to make you feel a little bit better. But sometimes if you continue to make this choice, how it can actually get in the way. In the long term, it might give you a short-term feeling of wellness, but in the long term, this could really work against you. So the deficiency, we're talking about low blood sugar. Somebody already mentioned the word hangry back there. So hangry is that state of anger caused by a lack of food, or that irritation because you're so hungry, you just don't feel right and you want food now. This occurs when our blood sugar levels drop below a normal range. And this can happen 2 to 8 hours after you've eaten. It's not uncommon to feel hungry every 2 hours. Just throwing that out there in case you're thinking something's wrong with you for feeling hungry 2 hours after you've had a meal. You probably just need a snack. So some symptoms. What do you feel when you have gone too long without food? Tired?
If you go long enough, you get the high.
Ah, you get the high? Yeah. In fasting?
I never have.
You've not felt it? You don't let yourself go there? Okay. It can be scary. I think my partner can attest to how scary it can be when I get angry. Some people feel dizzy, some people get shaky, can get confused, or someone's mentioned tired. You can have a hard time speaking or comprehending what you're reading. And this is experienced often if you're eating a diet that's high in refined foods or high in sugar. So how do we prevent ourselves from getting hangry? Eat frequently. If you feel hungry, feed yourself. Using that hunger scale can help you determine, well, how much food do I really want right now? What level of hunger am I at? And what will satisfy me to get me through to the next opportunity to eat? Learning your hunger cues, again, using that hunger scale. It could be different for everyone. Some people might really know that they're hungry because they have a sensation in their belly. Some people might just know that they're hungry because they're starting to feel tired and cranky, or maybe dizzy, or something along those lines. And then balancing your snacks and meals by including protein and fiber. So I said that it's common if you have a diet high in refined foods that you might feel hangry on a regular basis. And that's because these refined foods, the blood sugar, the glucose, which is the fuel that our body uses, all carbohydrates break down into glucose quickly, and it's just used quickly. When you have protein, complex carbohydrates, it takes a little bit longer for these foods to break down, turn into glucose, and you get a longer, steadier stream of glucose to your blood. So you can go a little bit longer before you feel hungry again. And so we want to limit the simple processed and concentrated carbohydrates, or at least combine them with a fat or a protein. And something around here that we like to encourage people to try is our 80-20 rule. So you don't have to completely cut out what we call the play foods, those foods that you eat because they're just good, and because or you're at a party and you want to have cake like everybody else. But you don't have to completely cut them out. But maybe 80% of the time you choose the whole foods. You choose to go with the balanced meal of the protein, carbohydrate, and fat. The whole grains, legumes, the veggies in your fruits, and enjoy the play foods 20% of the time. Because they're important to us, right? They're important to our well-being on an emotional level, and to connecting to our traditions and to other people. And they bring us a lot of pleasure. And then the macronutrients. Amy already talked a little bit about fat. And so why does fat matter in our diet? Well, fats are building blocks for hormones in our body. Cholesterol is a type of fat. Do you know that estrogen is a type of cholesterol? So you need this in your diet for proper estrogen production, for regulation of estrogen in your body. And the ratios matter. Amy's talked about omega-3s and omega-6 and omega-3s, and we want a particular ratio of those in our diet. In the typical American diet, we have high omega-6s as opposed to high omega-3s, which is why you might hear a lot about the fish oil supplements and flaxseed oil, because it can be very difficult in the typical American diet to get adequate omega-3s. But why do we want omega-3? Because omega-3 helps with reduction of inflammation. Studies show that diets with omega-3s that are rich in omega-3s also those people have improved mood. And there are a lot of studies right now about omega-3 and the influence on depression and the reduction of depression. and anxiety as well. And so getting those omega-3 food sources into our diet, the fatty fishes, flaxseed oil or flax seeds, walnuts, walnut oil, those are all excellent sources of omega-3. Going back to the cholesterol and talking about the sex hormones, have you ever heard of evening primrose oil? It's been a traditional supplement for women with PMS and I believe even menopause. And it's because it's an oil, it's a fat, it has omega-3 fats in them, as well as some other components that are believed to be helpful for reducing symptoms of PMS. So that's just an example. In your packet is the Bastyr My Healthy Plate. And we've included this to give you a tool for creating a balanced meal so that you can get adequate amounts as well as ratios of the macronutrients. Can I borrow? No, I want to borrow one. So I want you to take a look at this and let's look at how this plate is broken down. You can see half the plate on the left here is vegetables. And so what Amy introduced is that a wide and varied diet is helpful in getting all of the nutrients that we need and the micronutrients included. And so half a plate covered in vegetables. And then we have on the right corner whole grains and starches. So it doesn't just have to be grains like rice, quinoa, but also maybe some starchy vegetables that have higher amounts of carbohydrates like some squashes or corn, carrots even. Those are high starchy vegetables. And then we have protein down here, which are animal source as well as plant-based proteins. And in the middle here we have our healthy fats. Healthy fats are important in our diet. And then there's fruit and water. And so we want you to just take a minute and maybe write down some of your favorite vegetables. On the other side of this, typically, there you go, it's over here. Maybe write down the foods that you enjoy. What are the vegetables that you enjoy? All the different colors, so that you can make sure that you get all the nutrients. Just take a minute, jot down your favorite veggies, some of your favorite fruits. What are the sources of healthy fat that you saw today in our slides? And then the protein sources that you enjoy. And whole grains. Is it clear on whole grains what some whole grains are? Brown rice as opposed to polished white rice. And then are there any bold individuals that want to share maybe a meal that you can create that you would like to eat using the foods that you've written down? You want to share? Give us an idea of a balanced meal using the healthy plate.
What I love is kale.
Kale?
And we'll put potatoes and then onions.
Okay, potatoes and onions. So you've got some starchy food in there too with the potato. You've got your veg with the greens and the onions. And protein. What would you do for protein?
Protein well, I don't like to put any meat when I'm making a kale soup.
Okay.
But for protein, actually I just came across a really great recipe. It's quinoa Mexican salad.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really great because it had so many different vegetables in there along with the quinoa.
Mm-hmm. So you've got some grain and
cilantro, green onions, corn.
What would you throw in for protein?
So black beans.
Black beans, great. That's great. Great. Anybody else have a meal they want to share? Or snack? Go
Well,
for it.
I'll do
Thank
my,
you.
my
Come on.
lunch. I actually bring a variety of things in a bag and put them in there and then make the lunch each day.
Okay.
At work, but I like lean uncured ham.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have it's frozen cooked
Wheat berries? Okay.
Yeah, and that I love to have a little bit of that. And then I'll add a little bit of craisins to that, and then the rest I do spring greens and spinach and Parmesan cheese and black beans, and I usually will have some nuts, whatever nuts I'm eating.
So you're getting your healthy fats from the nuts.
Yeah, and so that I have that, but I also do it on a 4-inch plate.
Okay.
To keep the calories down.
So the portion size.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And then for snacks, let's talk about snacks. So when you don't really want to eat a full meal, but you want to make it through the next few hours to when you can actually have time to have your big meal, what sort of snack would you choose?
Protein bar.
A protein bar. Right, because we said that protein helps us keep our blood sugar stable, right? So a little protein. I like to combine, if I want something that's a carby, either combining it with a fat or a protein can be helpful in keeping the blood sugar from spiking and dropping, right? So it'll help us keep a longer lasting, steady stream of glucose. This is some crazy rain for Seattle. And then drink lots of water.
Or open your mouth and
So maybe a handful of nuts with some craisins, right? So you get a little bit of sugar from the craisins, but you get the stabilizing fats with the nuts. What's a snack that you enjoy when, back here?
Sliced
Apples and almond butter. That's a great choice. Yeah. Carrots and hummus. Yeah, you get some protein, some fat in the hummus. Yeah, it is a snack. How do you feel after having a snickerdoodle?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
In the middle of it.
In the middle of it.
While you're eating the cookie.
Yeah, and then afterward, do you want another one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Peanut butter could help. You've got the fat and the protein in your peanut butter. That could help stabilize that sugar that's going in. You've got oranges and pumpkin seeds. Yeah. All right. So let's just talk quickly about external stimulants. So there are other things other than food that can influence our mood, right? If you have an allergy to a food, it can definitely influence your mood. It might make you cranky or irritable. It might make you sleepy.
It might.
It's different for everyone what their response is, what their allergic response. So, if you find that something happens, a big drastic change in your mood after consuming a particular food, it might be an allergy, and it might be time for you to go see a professional and perhaps figure out what's going on. And then other external stimulants, coffee, tea, chocolate. How many of you, the first thing you do in order to wake up, feel human, is have a cup of coffee? Yeah, it influences our mood. Or how many of you feel really awful if you don't have that coffee? How do you feel? If you usually have it every day and you miss a day. Yeah, it's a stimulant. One thing to keep in mind is that caffeine, these beverages, foods with caffeine, if you're prone to anxiety, it can actually influence more feelings of anxiety. Another thing about caffeine is that it could damage your gut bacteria. Christy mentioned the importance of a healthy gut earlier, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, and how caffeine can actually damage your healthy gut bacteria. And then alcohol. Alcohol, we know it influences the way that we feel. It affects our sleep cycle, causes a hypoglycemia, which is that drop in blood sugar that we are talking about, and it can also damage gut bacteria. So how can food promote a better mood? One, frequency. And planning ahead for your day so that you know when you're going to eat, when those opportunities are coming, so you don't have to get nervous.
planning so that you have food there, so when you do start to feel hungry, you have a solution immediately right there, so you don't have to make choices under duress. So now the gut neuroendocrine connection. Christy talked about that second brain in your stomach, and that serotonin is 95% of our serotonin is in our gut. I want to share with you something that Dr. Isaac Elias says about this. The neuroendocrine system, which is the branches of the hormonal and nervous systems that work together closely, play an important role in digestive and overall health. Your GI system is the most abundant source of regulatory neurotransmitters and neuropeptides outside the brain. An example of this is the fact that serotonin, one of the brain's chemicals that influences our mood, which Amy talked to you about, actually has its highest concentration in the gut. Scientists and researchers are currently studying the numerous links between our nervous system, our hormones, and our immune system. And the GI system serves as a rich ground for observing these connections. So we're finding that it's really important that we treat our stomach well. We still aren't sure about all the fascinating things that we're discovering about the gut, but we're getting a big clue that it's really important. And particularly gut bacteria. Have you been seeing these articles on our gut bacteria, the flora, the things that are living and growing in our guts? These are really important. And we can feed them with probiotics. Have you heard this word? It's kind of a big deal right now. Jamie Lee Curtis talking about yogurt. It's because yogurt contains probiotics, these living organisms that feed the good bacteria in our gut. And those good bacteria, the probiotics, feed on the prebiotics, which are found in like onions, some more examples. Cabbage, fruits and vegetables. Fish oils. Fish oils reduce inflammation and help improve digestion and absorption of nutrients in our gut. Cinnamon is found to be soothing and can improve digestion. It may balance blood sugar. Ginger root is nice for digestion, reducing inflammation. It contains antioxidants. Supports that immunity. A lot of our immunity starts in our gut. Fiber and water, super duper important to a happy, healthy gut. So there's more going on than just pushing food through. The other piece we want to talk about is liver function. Not so in that it determines our ability to detoxify our bodies, regulate our blood sugar, and properly metabolize nutrients, all which influence our mood. And so there are foods that are particularly helpful for our liver, keeping it clean as it's doing its work. Garlic, onions, broccoli, cauliflower, those cruciferous vegetables, beets are really great. Dandelion greens, those things in your yard, watercress and burdock root. So this is where we want to end today. Maybe taking a minute, using your packet, if there's a blank space for you, to reflect on what you've heard today.